Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and this is the first of 3 fantasy football videos for week 2 that I'll be posting today. This, of course, being one of our most favorite and popular videos amongst you all, my viewers, our trade targets video that we post here on a weekly basis with some of the best names that you can go out and snatch up for fairly reasonable prices after some trade market changes, if you will, over the past week. Whether these players had down weeks or recovering from minor injuries, whatever the case may be, I think there's an avenue to go out and get a fair price for these players in the market, and they can have a big time return in your lineups this season. I've already posted my top 5 must-buy running backs earlier on this week, so go check that video out. Those names, some of them will be included in today's video, but I put them towards the end of the list as I've already covered them in more detail on the channel here, obviously, this week. So I'll also be having some sell candidate videos posted later on in the week, so subscribe to the channel, turn the bell on if you're new around here so you're never late and never miss those episodes. But without further ado, let's hit that intro and get straight in to our trade targets for fantasy football week 2. Alrighty, here we go. So we had a lot of action go down in week 1. There's a lot of players I did not expect to be on this list that made it, because there was a lot of underwhelming producers this week, and I think a lot of players that we didn't expect to break out so early. You're talking rookies like Devonte Smith and Jamar Chase. Those guys broke out in week 1, and then we're watching vets who have been game in and game out producers for us struggle and seemingly be unable to find any production in week 1. The first of those names is Josh Allen. So we're starting with the quarterbacks in today's trade targets video. I've got 2 of them this week. Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills threw the football 51 times. This is obviously our QB1 in statistical production from last season. Again, 51 throws, only completes 30 passes, 270 yards, and 1 singular touchdown against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I chalk most of this up to the fact that he was under pressure. That Steelers front 7 might be the best in the league at applying pressure to the quarterback. And although Josh Allen is insistent on not taking sacks and running around in circles and doing anything he can to stay on his feet, that's still impacting his throws and his ability to throw in rhythm and get the ball properly to his receivers. So his production was down a lot this week in comparison to what his normal numbers are at. There's definitely a scenario here where you can get a fair price for him out on the trade market. Do not go out there and overpay for him. Quarterbacks are one of the deepest positions in our standard 1 quarterback leagues, so it's not vitally important that we go out and trade for either of these 2 players. We'll get into the next one here in just a second. But if the opportunity presents itself for a fair price, if you've got a question about what exactly that fair price might be, drop that down in the comment section below and give me your league-specific scenario. Tell me what was offered to you in exchange for Josh Allen. I'd be happy to help any of you guys with your questions. Pulling that trade off, I'll let you know if I think you should counteroffer and ask for more, change things up, whatever the case might be. I'm here to be a tool, an asset, a resource, for you all to get the best value in return in these trades and to ultimately try and better your teams for their top-end potential this season. So, into the next name here, Aaron Rodgers for the Green Bay Packers. They sucked week 1. Green Bay was awful. I don't think anyone expected the Saints to literally blow the brakes off the Packers. It was a disaster of a game, and what I think it is honestly a lot of the fault, the blame lies on number 12 here. He created noise all offseason long, distractions, wasn't with the team preparing. I think there's an element of these guys just weren't game ready. The chemistry was not there because he wasn't practicing with them throughout the entirety of OTAs. Now, he did come for training camp. He was present. That's all fine and dandy, but I think that there was a lot of things that led up to this negative performance, led up to these very disappointing numbers. And for fantasy purposes, what did we get? 1 point out on this week? 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They showed a stat during the game. Aaron Rodgers had 5 picks last season, and in 2 of his 3 passes in a row, he had 2 interceptions. So it was a very, very bad game. It was the worst loss of Aaron Rodgers' career with the Packers. Very, very disappointing. But moving forward, there is too much talent on this football field with the Packers offense out there for these numbers to continue. He's going to get better. He's going to trend upwards. He doesn't give you that elite quarterback rushing value that a Kyler Murray, a Josh Allen even, we're talking Lamar Jackson's, can provide to you. but he's still able to get out in and out of the pocket. He led the league in touchdown passes this year. I think that number will decline this season, and obviously having 0 week 1 does not help your chances. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to bounce back here. He's still got one of the top 3 receivers in football, Davante Adams. That chemistry, that connection was still there. We saw flashes of that last week. He's got some other options, some other weapons there they can use. He's going to have, there's work to do here in Green Bay. But at the end of the day, he's still a top 7 or 8 fantasy quarterback. And for the rest of the season, it's worth an investment if you can get him for a very reasonable price. I'm willing to pay more for Josh Allen, though, on the trade market than I am willing to pay for an Aaron Rodgers type player. Brandon Aiyuk here for the start of the wide receivers chunk of this video. Again, we're pushing running backs down the list because we did a top 5 must-buy running backs video just yesterday that came out. So some of those names will be repeats. I've got a couple new names on here as well. But nonetheless, Brandon Aiyuk held catchless in the week 1 opener against the Detroit Lions. So his value is plummeting right now. The time is now to buy, though. I think he's the top dog in this 49ers offense. Deebo Samuel had a ridiculously good game in week 1 against the Lions. But when Aiyuk is out there, I think he's the most prototypical wide receiver 1 type build on this roster. And he can do everything Deebo Samuel can do. And in my opinion, he does it a little bit better. Aiyuk's a better route runner at both the short, intermediate, and deep levels of the passing game. He can also do great run after catch work just like Deebo can. Great work at the line of scrimmage, catching passes and taking off after the fact. He's involved in that wide receiver run game. He's got it all going for him. He's dynamic. If we see Trey Lance take over this offense, I think the ceiling for everyone there vaults up higher. But even with Jimmy Garoppolo, he should be just fine. The reason he didn't have a catch was because he's dealing with a lingering hamstring issue, and Kyle Shanahan acknowledged that pushed him down the depth chart and reduced his play time. That is smart. This team saw Deebo Samuel miss nearly the entirety of last season from injuries. They don't want to derail their next best second-year wide receiver season, making the mistake of pushing him out there on the field before he's ready and worsening an injury and increasing the timetable it takes for him to get back to 100%. So once he's there, Aiyuk's going to be money. He's going to be out here putting up great numbers. In the meantime, be patient. That value on the fantasy market is plummeting. You can probably go scoop him up for the best price you'll be able to all season long right now, for the sole fact that he literally did not record a stat in week 1. Darnell Mooney. This is another interesting one here. Probably someone that a lot of people aren't thinking about right now, but I am thinking about Darnell Mooney and projecting his long-term upside as a deep threat when Justin Fields takes over this offense. What did I see from Andy Dalton in week 1? He doesn't like to pass the ball downfield. He's very safe, and he's a little bit clunky back there. Justin's going to come in, make this offense a lot smoother once he's given the opportunity to start. And if Andy Dalton looks the way he did in week 1, that's not all that far down the road because they're going to have to transition. There's going to be too much pressure put on Matt Nagy to start the talented rookie. And this football team might get in a situation, they could lose a trap game to Cincinnati this week, start the season 0-2. And if Andy Dalton's not winning games, you have no justifiable reason to keep him in the starting lineup outside of your claim to not want to ruin Justin. So long story short here, Darnell Mooney was one of the best deep route runners in the league last season from that 2020 rookie class. He's very explosive, very quick, agile, elusive. If you get a quarterback in there who can put the ball in the breadbasket, he's going to put up some really great numbers, and he could be that next breakout fantasy star that we're all looking for and trying to find. So coming off a 5-reception, 26-yard performance against the Rams, that's not all that flashy. Those numbers aren't all that exciting. Go take advantage of him, scoop him up. He could be a very valuable high-upside wide receiver too late in the season. Getting back towards more wide receiver 1 caliber players, Calvin Ridley had a down week for the Falcons. He is my wide receiver 4 in my pre-draft rankings for the entire wide receiver class. And it looked early on in that game against the Eagles, which, by the way, that was an embarrassment of a loss to Philadelphia. The Falcons just got shell-shocked. Ridley started out catching pass after pass, but then quickly fizzled out and just couldn't replicate that production for the entire game. 5 receptions, 51 yards, Falcons blowout loss. You would think that he would have had more opportunities, more volume, considering the fact that Philadelphia was crushing them so much and they would have needed to be pushing the tempo of this offense, but he wasn't able to get it done this week. I think that trending forwards here, though, there's going to be an uptick in that volume. He's going to see more receptions. He's going to be more capable of putting up those elite ceiling games we saw from him last season, and he should trend back to those numbers. I'm very confident in Calvin Ridley. I think he'll bounce back here. And for any managers in your leagues that might be panicking on him, go take advantage of him. Again, another great upside piece at that wide receiver position. Courtland Sutton for the Denver Broncos. His stock's a little lower right now. He's coming off a significant knee injury, suited up for his first NFL action against the Giants last week, 1 catch, 14 yards. Why would I want to trade for him? Well, Jerry Jeudy, the number 2 receiving option in this offense, out for I've heard timelines anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks. I've heard 4 being the earliest from the Broncos themselves. I've heard doctors and experts say it's no fewer than 6 weeks. Whatever the case may be, Jerry Jeudy's out for at least a month. Courtland Sutton, who arguably was already the number 1 target in this offense, now has extra targets and passes, extra volume that's got to be redistributed across the board here. So Courtland will absorb some of that. If he can bounce back here, I think that between his stature, his frame, his ability to work in the red zone, I've seen him run some very nice crisp routes in the preseason. He should come out here and begin to start producing for us. His matchup this week against the Jags is very advantageous, so snatch him up while you can now. I think his stock is going to rise after this week because I expect a very strong performance from him. So do this before it's too late. I think he can have a big-time jump in his ceiling and floor as a result of that Jeudy injury. And maybe this is a player, 6 weeks down the line, we hear Jerry Jeudy's coming back. He's been producing great. Flip him for another better asset and continue to grow your fantasy wealth, if you will, using investments and getting returns on those investments from trades you made early on in the season. Chase Claypool. Now, this is the player I think is the number 1 wide receiver, and he's being treated as such as was shown against the Bills here in week 1. Tre'Davious White was the player who was spending the majority of his time covering Chase Claypool. I don't blame him. This guy has the best frame, the best ability to produce in the red zone. He was a touchdown magnet as a rookie, and he just has that X wide receiver build. He's fast. He can get runs. He can get run after the catch. He can be used in the wide receiver run game. He's a very dynamic player. I love Deontay Johnson. Not a big fan of Juju Smith-Schuster, but he is valuable in a fantasy sense somewhat as well. Chase is the guy, though. He actually had the quietest game of the bunch. Again, I chalked that up to Tre'Davious White, one of the league's best corners, following him around for a lot of that football game in week 1. I think the Steelers' offense is going to have to get better. They're going to have to trend upwards. They're going to have to become more efficient, distribute their targets in a more balanced manner. Claypool, in these easier matchups, when he's not playing some of the league's premier talent, should be a lot better. Another player like a Courtland Sutton, who has an easier matchup this coming week. So pull that trigger while you can and get that nice price. Into the running backs here, a new name that didn't make my top 5 must-buy list because I think the price hasn't exactly dropped significantly this week. But the thing I like here is that the price didn't really raise itself. For such a dynamic player, a guy who I think has one of the best ceilings at the running back position because of his pass-catching ability, his red zone usage, and his involvement as just a every down rusher, Antonio Gibson had 108 yards from scrimmage. I believe he did have a fumble as well, and he didn't score a touchdown. So you're looking at a quality performance from him, but nothing that was all that spectacular that would tip a fantasy manager's hand and say, wow, I need to hang on to this guy. His usage and his role in this offense is essentially that of Christian McCaffrey in Carolina. Now, is he the same talent as Christian McCaffrey? Probably not. Does he have the same upside? I would back off of that a little bit as well. But the point is the usage, the volume, the potential production is there, and he could prove me wrong. I'm someone who's very high on Antonio Gibson this season. I think he can be by far and in a way an easily top 10 fantasy running back producer by the season's end. He finished as RB13 as a rookie last year. He could prove me wrong and exceed my expectations for him even. So when you talk about a gunslinger and Fitzmagic now being out, Tyler Heineke is now the quarterback for this Washington football team offense. They might be leaning on him even more. He might see an even further increase in that offensive volume and production. The sky's the limit for Gibson here this year, so go out, try and get him on your team. Ezekiel Elliott, a player who you don't see guys with this much volume, this much of a safe fantasy floor and a great offense produce as little as they did, like Zeke experienced in week 1. That's the toughest matchup for an opposing running back this season. If you're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you do not want to be starting the running back facing them in that matchup. You're praying for a touchdown, a blown assignment on a stunt or something that results in a bursted run. Zeke had less than 40 yards from scrimmage, and he also saw under 20 total touches. That will trend up. That will improve. He's got the Chargers this week. I expect him to produce quality numbers and get back to being a certified RB1 producer. Week in and week out, he's added that pass-catching game to his repertoire. He was used a little bit in that fashion last week. At the end of the day, Zeke isn't anymore the most flashy running back in fantasy football like he once was, but he's absolutely a dependable, every single week, sit and forget type player. And now that we got that Tampa Bay matchup out of the way, I'm not too concerned about any matchups the rest of the season. Najee Harris for the Pittsburgh Steelers, another Pittsburgh player here on the list. Their offense just wasn't all that flashy week one. They had a really tough matchup. The Bills are an underrated defense, a very well-coached team. Najee had under 3 yards per target, under 3 yards per touch. That's not what you want to see out of your running back. You want to get towards those Alvin Kamara numbers, that uber efficiency, 4.5, 5 yards a touch. Najee can get there. He might not see exactly the extremes that a Kamara sees because he's such a dynamic pass catcher and sees such a high volume in that phase of the game that gets him out in space and the ability to do that. But even if Najee can get from the 2.8 that he was at this week up to 4.5, you're talking about a player with a 3-down skill set, the ability to be used in the red zone. Rookie running backs are what wins fantasy leagues more often than not because their ceiling is so high. They've got fresh legs. They get the workhorse usage by the season's end. Najee is that player this year. He is the best candidate to have that upside potential. So don't miss out on the opportunity right now while his stock is low, while people are probably having second thoughts and questions, doubts about him. Najee Harris will be just fine. We saw Jonathan Taylor get off to not quite this rocky of a start last season, but it was a shaky start. He didn't really break out until the last third of the year. So give Najee some time. He'll come around. Don't worry about that part. Javonte Williams for the Denver Broncos, another name here, a rookie running back. It's inevitable that sooner rather than later, he will break out and he will assert himself as the lead back in that Broncos offense. It won't be right now. We just saw Melvin Gordon have a very good game. He's got a nice matchup this week. I think he'll have another strong performance here in week 2. But week 8, week 10, once we start to get into the crucial games of the season where you need to be winning those fantasy matchups, Javonte Williams inevitably will eventually become the guy. There's no question. Taken at the top of the second round. He's got the draft capital invested into him. He's got a running back in front of him right now who's on an expiring contract. They have yet to extend Melvin Gordon. All signs point to Javonte Williams being the long-term plan here, being the guy they want to finish this season out with and learn whether or not he can be a franchise running back, which I believe he can. So get that upside, that league-winning potential. Javonte Williams down the stretch of the season has the opportunity to be that guy, whether it's Gordon getting injured, whether it's Gordon having a couple inefficient games, not producing up to standard. He'll find his way in the field. He will produce. Fangio has already spoken miles and miles or just super highly of him and talked about how there's no situation on the field they don't feel comfortable starting Williams or playing him at. That's what you want to hear from the coach. That's what you want to hear being said about a rookie who's trying to find his way on the field. So Javonte Williams, and then moving into the final position here, the tight end spot. There wasn't too many top-end names that I felt were strong targets this week because most of the top-end fantasy tight ends, they produced. They got their numbers. They got their volume. They produced touchdowns. It was a pretty dang good week for fantasy tight ends. There was a few lower-end options that didn't produce, and we saw even a Gronk come out and have 2 touchdowns and almost 100 yards. You'll see him featured in a later video this week with my sell candidates video. Basically the opposite of this, whereas today's episode is players whose stock has dropped and I think will then trend back upwards. You can take advantage of their prices for lower right now. The sell high video is players who I think overachieved, and now you can look to take advantage of that if you're a fantasy owner and flip them for one of these players who I think has more value, more opportunity, more upside to your lineup. So Kyle Pitts, no surprise to me. I have not been extremely high on Kyle Pitts. I've got him as my tight end 6, so still very respectable territory for him in terms of the overall season. That is my tight end 6. I've got him behind Hockenson, Mark Andrews, and I just said the transition to playing NFL tight end is so much harder than a lot of other positions because you have to block, and I actually watched Kyle Pitts get smoked on a block in week 1 by Brandon Graham. You're going to have to be blocking 250-pound defensive linemen. They're some of the best pass rushers, some of the best athletes in the league. That's an adjustment. I know he's great. I know he's got a lot of, he has the largest wingspan that we've seen of a player in the last, 20 or 30 years? I forget exactly the stat, but he's a freak of nature, a physical specimen, an absolute potentially dominant tight end threat. but the curve, the adjustment is going to be rocky. It's going to be tough. I still think he can be a very productive tight end this season. I think he'll have extremely great performances this year and have a really high ceiling. Only 4 grabs for 31 yards in that blowout loss to Philadelphia. But obviously, that price is down right now. Again, a rookie. Players might begin to panic on him. There's going to be a situation, though, where Russell Gage was a non-factor in that Eagles loss. Calvin Ridley, his numbers were down. Someone else needs to step up here. That Julio Jones void is looking very, very large right now, and it's begging for somebody to step up and take advantage of it. Pitts should be that guy. I hope he can be that guy. And if he is that guy, you can get yourself a positional advantage, even more so than any other player you've got outside of those Andrews, Hawkinsons, Kittles, Wallers, and Kelseys. I think Kyle Pitts is the start of that next tier and is a top-end option. So if you're looking for an upgrade, a potential improvement, you can roll the dice here. I still think it's risky, but Kyle Pitts does have potential to be a great return on investment by the end of the season because, again, a lot of times it takes rookies even half, maybe more of the season to reach that breakout performance. Alrighty, that was 12 week 2 trade targets here for 2021 fantasy football. Again, please, if you have any questions, any scenarios you want to run through with me in the comment section below for trades being offered to you in your leagues or asking my opinion on a trade you're offering to someone else, I'd love to help you. I'd love to be an asset, a tool, a resource for you to help improve your lineups, your teams, and your leagues this season. Drop down, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. This is a very busy week. We've got a ton of content coming out. There's a ton of videos for you to take advantage of and to watch already on the channel for week 2 advice and action. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.